What is the role of the global elite in Ukraine? We have an absolute shell game going on right now. You need to look between the lines and kind of figure this stuff out. And I want to get into the larger picture here of what's going on in Ukraine. Let's get into it. There was a saying in the 19th century, God must be an American because of so many natural resources on the USA continent. We have a vast amount of resources. And in war, truth is always the first casualty. So much propaganda on both sides, and I'm looking at both sides of this, folks. I'm not on the side of the Russians, but it's important to see how all this ties together. Remember, it's not what I say, it's why I say it. And without the help of US and NATO, Ukraine will fall. No matter what you hear in the media, Ukraine will fall. And most analysts think the odds of a ceasefire are increasing in Ukraine. They have it exactly backwards. We've actually moved closer to the nightmare scenario where Kiev is simply leveled. Remember, if you look at history in Iraq, it took roughly 2 weeks for Baghdad to fall. We're not even 2 weeks into this, and Putin has not even also gone hardcore yet. And we have the media saying, oh, all this resistance. He hasn't even gone hardcore yet. And just recently, the House of Representatives passed a resolution, this is concerning, that gives Biden a blank check to spend more money in Ukraine by a vote of 426-3. The House passed H.R. 956. H.R. gives Biden anything he wants in Ukraine. It commits us to fight Russia as long as Ukrainian sovereignty is being threatened, violated. So you know what that means? Now we could be there for decades, folks, spending money for the military-industrial complex. That is right, folks, decades. John Bolton, a total war hawk, just said in an interview that China is a greater threat to national security than Russia. Russia, as we all know, folks, has the economy the size of Texas. Okay? So, of course, it was the U.S. and other Western powers that set the stage for all of this. If you look at history, and I'm just reporting the history of this, some people don't know this, I don't think. The United States invested a lot of money in order to promote a color revolution in Ukraine in 2013, 2014, and oust former Ukrainian president. So that's clearly proved by U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland's leaked phone call and a lot of research on this and a lot of articles and white papers. So it's on record. So in 2014, if you look at the history, the Obama administration, along with George Soros, had dug their claws in with the Open Society infiltration in 2014, and other Western powers were behind the color revolution, which violently overthrew the democratically elected government in Ukraine. So what did that result in? That resulted in an extremely violent civil war between the new U.S.-backed government and the separatists, which were backed by Russia. So you could argue, is this a good thing that we did or a bad thing? That's not the purpose of this video. But the CIA has been running Ukraine for the last 8 years. So the question you have to ask is, do you think the people of Ukraine have been suffering before the war? Yes, they have. And it has been argued and proven that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in the world. It's in the top 5, but a lot of people say it's the most corrupt country in the world even before this war. And the U.S. was running it right now. You know, this puppet comedian actor has been in there. So, hey, I'm just reporting the facts. And you can look at the facts. You know, the propaganda is epic on both sides of this. Remember the ghost of Kiev in the news, Snake Island? That all turned out to be fake news. Both sides have a military doctrine in an event they are losing a conventional war. This should scare you. So here's a chilling quote. Russia shall reserve the right to use nuclear weapons in the event of aggression, when the very existence of the state is in jeopardy. That's a military doctrine the U.S. has in Russia. So do you remember when Russia put weapons of mass destruction off the Florida coast in Cuba? What did we do? Remember what we did? We freaked out. Well, NATO has been poking the Russian bear and keeps moving closer to Russia's border and saying they might make Ukraine part of NATO. Putin has said, if you say you won't make Ukraine part of NATO, I won't invade. State Department came back and said, no way, we're not going to do that. So say what you will about the last administration. Things were relatively stable during the Trump administration. There was no wars. But then Biden administration started filling Zelensky's head with all sorts of ideas about joining NATO and taking Donetsk and Luhansk by force. And Zelensky bought into what Biden administration officials were telling him, hook, line, and sinker. So the history of this and the data shows the Russians tried to negotiate, but Zelensky and the Biden administration steadfastly refused to compromise. So the Russians felt like they were out of options, and now the Biden administration does, not want to fight a war that they helped to cause. So right now in the news, the warmongers are talking about violating, having a no-fly zone. We'll get into that, how the stories have changed. And even though his country is now being destroyed, Zelensky is continuing to talk tough. 44 million people live in Ukraine, and they are deeply suffering in a war that most of them do not want. Like most of us, the vast majority of Ukrainians just want to live their lives in peace and quiet. It would be nice, but that isn't going to be possible now. The Russian military is still in a strategic position to win the war. They've already surrounded major cities, and they're on the way to encircling Ukraine forces in Donetsk. And if this were a strategy game, you'd really want to play it as Russia, because they're crushing them. And, the fall of Korsun today, a city of 300,000 people, marked the turning point in the war. The Ukrainian forces barely put up a resistance, and the city was spared, so it didn't get destroyed. Russia is saying, seems like from on the ground, hey, put down your weapons. The message to other cities is clear: fight and be leveled, or surrender and be treated kindly. So if President Putin accepts something like a conditional surrender that preserves the integrity of the Ukrainian government, that will, be spun as a defeat for Russia, and Putin doesn't want that. So, it may sound paradoxical from the outside, but Russia's tactical defeats now make strategic victory imperative for him. He's backed into a corner. So to preserve Russia's aspiration to be a superpower, there must be no doubt at the end of the war who the victor was. This guy's all in now. So it must be Russia by a crushing margin. Ukrainian forces survived so long in the early days of the war because Russia was reluctant to use heavy artillery no longer. Ukrainian forces survived so long in the early days of the war because Russia was reluctant to use heavy artillery. That's no longer the case right now. So the million-dollar question is whether the Russians will use the same heavy-handed tactics in Kiev capital. There's actually a simple answer to this. They don't want to, but they will if they have to, and they're backed into a corner and they start taking on casualties themselves. So laying siege to a city of 3 million could be the ugliest part of the war. This raises a troubling moral quandary. Are we really helping the Ukrainians by encouraging them to fight? That's an interesting question. So I want to be very clear about the fact that I personally, from the research, place a great deal of blame for this conflict on the global elite. The Biden administration and other Western powers encourage Ukrainian President Zelensky to endlessly provoke the Russians, and they made all sorts of promises to him. So, Zelensky pushed all of his chips into the middle of the table, and even though the Russians knew that the U.S. and Europe would not fight if they invaded, that's what it was early in the game. Now Russia has called the bluff, and the U.S. and Europe have stayed out on the sidelines right now. They certainly don't want to fight the Russians. It would be ridiculous. But they have no problem encouraging Ukrainians to sacrifice countless lives fighting a battle that they cannot possibly win if Russia goes all in 100%. So asking the Ukrainians to fight Russia is like asking a skinny 10-year-old boy to fight a 25-year-old heavyweight boxing champion. You're going after Mike Tyson here. So it isn't a fair fight, no matter what the media tells you. Now weapons are being supplied to Ukraine. Needless to say, none of these global leaders are actually going to participate in this fight. They are way too important for that. They're going to sit on the sidelines at home while young boys and men and women go fight in this war. So instead, we're going to continue to see women and children face off against Russian tanks. And that is an absolute disgrace. It's a disgrace. So wouldn't it be great if the international rules of war were changed to say that those that start a war must fight in it? But instead of fighting for Ukraine, the global elite are attempting to put lots of pressure on Russia in other ways. So, for example, all Russian-owned and bred cats have now been banned from international competitions. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Russian cats bred have been banned from international competition. An International Cat Federation has banned all Russian-owned and bred cats from competing in international competition. In a move that's sure to stop Putin's attack on Ukraine. You can't make this stuff up. So the Federation of International Feline, the FIFE, issued a statement saying it cannot just witness these atrocities and do nothing. So yes, I'm sure that the citizens of Kiev and other major cities in Ukraine will be greatly encouraged when they hear that statement. That's fantastic. So, and as the Ukrainian cities are plummeted by relentless shelling, the U.S. Army has decided that now is a great time to be putting its soldiers through training on gender pronouns. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, there is a focus group and they're putting their soldiers through training for gender pronouns. So while Russia wages a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. Army is putting its soldiers through training on gender pronouns and coaching officers on to offer soldiers gender transition surgery, according to an official military presentation on the subject attained by the Washington Free Beacon. So that's all over the news right now. We're talking about that as a war rages on and these poor people in Ukraine. So millions of Ukrainians will soon be very cold and hungry as they are relentlessly shelled by the mighty Russian military machine right now. But most Ukrainians never wanted any of this, folks. If anyone deserves such a fate, it is the global elite that actually caused the war in the first place. There's a bigger shell game going on here. Now, World War III is here, and the global elite think that they are going to be able to just watch it from a safe distance in their bunker. But this won't just be limited to Ukraine. This is terrible. So war is going to spread, and it will eventually deeply affect all of us. And I think the globalists have given up on humanity. So, you know, what happened to COVID, folks? Last 2 weeks, you don't hear about it in the news anymore. It suddenly, it suddenly went away. It's gone. COVID, there's no more COVID. Now it's war, war, war. So, where are we going with this? Right now, Elon Musk calls for the U.S. to increase oil and gas immediately. In my opinion, we increase our oil and gas production, not giving Russia $70 million per day. Europe cuts Putin off. This war would end. He would stop. He's emboldened to do this. Oil right now is over $139 a barrel. White House digs in, and they said just today, no domestic oil production, $139 a barrel. Biden humiliation. Russia in control of Iran nuke deal talks right now. Isn't that strange? Russia is in control of the Iran nuke talk deal. There's a shell game going on here, ladies and gentlemen. And now we have Lindsey Graham calling for the assassination of heads of state. Lindsey Graham is called to assassinate Vladimir Putin. And according to Rand Paul, this is going to make things worse and it's just escalating the situation. It's actually against U.S. law to call for the assassination of heads of states. And if you look at the history of Lindsey Graham, and Lindsey Graham said if, we take out Saddam Hussein, there will be freedom in Iraq. That's what Lindsey said, if we take out Saddam Hussein and other people. And what happened in Iraq? Are they free right now? It's a mess over there. So let's just say, let's say we take out Putin. After Putin, then what? You're going to have a civil war over there. And let's say, he has the second largest reserve of nuclear weapons in the world. Let's say some tribal mercenary group, Al-Qaeda, gets access to those nuclear weapons because we started a war and we assassinated their president and a coup happens. That would be an absolute mess as Iraq. Look at history, and that's all I'm trying to do is look at history here, and you can see this from a different angle. There is a shell game going on here. It's deeper, and if you look at the coup that happened in 2014, you can make an argument and say maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. I'm not getting into the micro of that, but Ukraine is the most corrupt country in the world before this war. A lot of corruption has been going on in Ukraine. Money's been going in the front door, out the back door. What is the U.S. interest over there? What is our interest over there? We're extremely concerned about the Ukrainian border, but we're not concerned about the border in the United States, where 65 countries are coming across the border. Drugs, human trafficking, people are being killed. What is our fight over there? That's the purpose of this video. What is our fight over there? And a no-fly zone is very dangerous right now, and I don't think people are thinking clearly about that. Are you going to call Putin's bluff that he might not use nuclear weapons? You're dealing with a guy who has the second largest nuclear reserves in the world, and we're going to put a no-fly zone in and start shooting down Russian planes? Is that really the best thing? I mean, why is the United States all over the news pushing for war? Why are we pushing for war when we could cut this guy's oil off and cut him at the knees and send him back to Russia rather than provoke a war with a gentleman that has the second largest nuclear weapons in the world? So I'm not for Russia, but we have to look at both sides of this. And it's terrible what's happening in Ukraine. In my opinion, it doesn't need to happen. We could do it in a strategic way through diplomacy rather than war. And we're close here, and it's very scary. Take care.